able to address these issues. Today, we are facing tremendous challenges, a dramatic increase in people in need, people who have food insecurity, people who are struggling because they're distant from their family and friends, suffering from social isolation. The way that we look at this issue in the Jewish community and the Federation is through three lenses. The problem that's right in front of us, and that's dealing with our most vulnerable, no matter where they live. The problem around the corner, how is this going to impact our precious Jewish infrastructure, our summer camps, our day schools, our synagogues, the Jewish organizations we relied on before this crisis? We have to be able to rely on them after this crisis. And then how do we look at all this from the morning after this is all over? Because my friends, it will be over. It might not seem soon. It might not seem soon enough. But one day we'll be back to where we were before. And what will we have learned? And how will the community have changed? Those are the questions that I think about every day. And I try to figure out how we can strategize about making this Jewish community stronger. Before this virus hit the community, the Jewish Federation's goal was to build and secure a flourishing, dynamic Jewish community. That goal will remain as we enter into the next phase of this. But in the meantime, we have to recognize our vulnerabilities. We have to recognize that even though we're stuck in our houses, there are people among us who don't have houses. And even if our Passover Seders are with less people, there are people who do not have food for their Passover Seders. These are the things we have to think about. What's right in front of us today to address, what's right around the corner to protect, and the Jewish community want to build for the future the way that we wanted to build it before this virus hit the community. And now it's my great honor to introduce my friend to one of the great spiritual leaders in the Jewish world, Rabbi Sharon Brous.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to Lori and Albert, and especially to Dr. Riggs for bringing all of us together so that we can hear really from your wisdom and see what the community can do to hold us and keep us healthy and safe physically and spiritually as we go through this crisis. So Jay asked for me to share a few words of Torah at the top of this meeting, and I will tell you that there's been a lot written over the course of the last couple of weeks about the fact that we, it seems, are living through a modern day plague. And many people have been looking to our Passover story, which we're going to come together on Wednesday night and Thursday night to reflect on and to remember, and talking about which of the plagues this plague is most like. It looks from the text as if this plague is very similar to the fifth plague, Dever, Kaved Me'od. There was a pestilence, a severe epidemic in the land. But I've been thinking about this for the last several weeks, more like the ninth plague, the plague of darkness. This is the strangest of all of the plagues because all that happened was that it was dark for 3 days. And we imagine that the plagues were increasing in their severity. So by the ninth, it should have been very, very much worse than just inconvenient or uncomfortable. And yet darkness, sitting in darkness, just doesn't seem like it even compares with some of the others that we've already seen. And yet the text tells us in the book of Exodus that the plague was so severe that people could not see one another and could not get up from where they were. And our rabbis tell us that what that actually means was that the deepest darkness descended upon Egypt, in which a person would be with her in her suffering and her pain. The rabbis say that when a person no longer feels as though she's impotent, and then she starts to learn to sit idly by while other people are suffering, and that actually is the worst of what happened during this plague. When we can't be with each other in our suffering and our pain, our lives become stripped of meaning. When we can't stand by the graveside and bury loved ones, when we can't go to the hospital and visit those we love who are sick, our lives start to lose meaning and we quickly begin to feel impotent. So what do we lose when we can no longer help? There was a really great piece written a couple of weeks ago about the Great Alaska Earthquake of 1964 that talks about how after this great disaster struck, when many social scientists expected to see violence and looting and other manifestations of selfishness and fear and vulnerability in the population, instead what they saw was resilience and level-headedness and cooperation and compassion, which they learned was actually an outcome of a shared sense of vulnerability that the people had. Because sometimes after a kind of great devastation occurs, people feel like we're really all in this together, and they start to work together toward their collective safety. And that's happening now in this case. On one level, we're more aware of our interconnectedness than ever before. This tiny microscopic virus, which is transmitted through invisible droplets, has traversed land and sea and upended all of our worlds. And yet we are denied the ability to stand together now, to hug one another and hold one another. We know that our medical workers and other essential workers are on the front lines, but other than cheering for them at 7 p.m. each night and staying home, we're mostly powerless. And that is a kind of plague of darkness. If being able to pull one another out from the rubble and rebuild the streets in Anchorage after a terrible earthquake is what made people feel connected back then what will be the effects of social distancing and isolation and quarantine on our spirits? How long will it be before we move from wanting to help to feeling impotent, to averting our eyes when we do pass one another, to actively seeing each other as competition for limited resources and even collateral damage, and therefore expendable in a time of devastation and crisis? How quickly will we move from a sense of shared vulnerability to a spirit of scarcity that will blind us to one another's humanity? This is the terror of the ninth plague, the terror of being alone, of being isolated, invisible, untouchable, not able to be seen and no longer able to see one another, oblivious to another person's pain, and each of us ourselves becoming directionless and dispirited and purposeless. That's what we risk today. What we've seen in the community over the past several weeks is that the risk of the effects of isolation are very real, that the fear is very profound. We fear for our own health and safety and for our loved ones, for our friends, and for our society. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety that everybody's feeling, anticipatory grief, and also actual grief. There's a loss that is compounded by the denial of physical proximity to our loved ones who are ill, and the inability to perform tahara, the burial rites after a loved one dies, and even in more and more places now to be present at the burial. So it is upon us to ask the question of what the antidote is to the ninth plague, to the plague we're living in now, the plague of darkness. And this is where the work of the Federation, I believe, is incredibly important, because what we need in order to survive right now is we need spiritual strength and support. We need communities of love and shared purpose. We need a strong sense of closeness even when we're apart. And we've seen that with astonishing beauty, even over the last couple of weeks when I've participated in a Zoom Shiva almost every single night since the isolation began, and seen how living rooms have filled up with faces not only of loved ones and friends who live nearby, but also people from New York and Spain and Jerusalem who are able to call in and give and share love. We've seen this in the way that our Federation has so generously offered grants to people in our community who need help and support in order to buy groceries for Passover this year. These and so many other efforts are attempts to break through the plague of darkness and help us all see one another again and feel seen, especially in this moment of incredible pain and isolation. And I hope and pray that we all remember that on the other side of the plague of darkness for our ancestors, the Israelites, who are on their journey to liberation in the promised land, is redemption. That was the case for our ancestors, and that will be the case for all of us. Jay is right, there will be a morning after. And the question is, will we be able to translate the lessons that we've learned from this time of crisis and catastrophe into really building a society that's rooted in our core values of love, of dignity, of equity and equality, and above all, of justice for every one of us? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Brous. Dr. Riggs.
thank you for the invitation to be with you and the Jewish Federation today. I appreciate the invitation. I doubt that I'll be nearly as uplifting and insightful as the rabbi, but I did want to share some of the questions have been about how our County of Los Angeles is doing with regard to the sort of cases and deaths, and look at the United States. So what we're going to share here is a LA County Public Health website that's open to everyone, where you can easily find information that's updated on an ongoing basis about our local county, and including the number of cases and the number of deaths, as well as what this looks like across the United States. One of the pieces that we have talked about very early on is that the physical distancing, I like to say that word instead of social distancing, the physical distancing is very important because of the spread, the mechanism of spread of this particular virus, which is through droplets and through close proximity. That's why we continue to look at the 6 feet sort of parameters. And despite the sort of temporary inconvenience of this particular piece, I think that we in California started our physical distancing much earlier than other areas around the country. And what we are seeing is some of the modeling that's been occurring with regard to our date of physical distancing and the sort of shutdown of our society and travel has been is very, very encouraging. It does not mean that we can stop. It means that we have to actually double down on that, because that allows us to increase the likelihood that anyone that does get sick is able to access the care that they need in the ways that they need it. So I think that from my standpoint, the outpouring of donations, offers for sourcing personal protective equipment, the feeding of our nurses, some of our staff here say the 19 in COVID-19 stands for the number of pounds they're going to gain because of the amount of food that's been flowing in. But again, all of these in ways of connecting us in ways that people can feel supported and feel like they're supporting the cause. These have been very moving for our community here at Cedars-Sinai. I want to have one sort of health note here, which is that if we look at some of the data across the country, we're seeing that people are not obtaining the regular care they may need in this environment. And so I want to, for instance, the number of heart attacks, people presenting to EDs with heart attacks and chest pain, as well as other things like stroke symptoms and exacerbations of breathing illnesses or heart failure have dropped. No one should be postponing the care that they need in a semi-urgent or urgent manner, because we all are bound and duty bound to take care of ourselves to be healthy. So I know that seems like an awkward message to say in this time when we're preparing for who knows how many COVID-19 patients who may get sick over the period of time. But I also want to point out that the regular connection to your physicians and your healthcare providers can be made in a lot of alternate ways. So if you're having difficulty or having health problems, you should seek that attention and not try to wait this out, because the modeling that we're doing now looks at us, peaking in the next, say, 10, 14, 21 days. But even if we peak at that particular time frame, we'll have a shoulder after that where we'll be immersed in the care also. So one should not postpone the health care that they need at this time if they're urgent, and also connect with your regular caregivers. Many physicians in the community have set up ways to connect both telephonically as well as via video to have evaluations. So with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, who's going to begin with questions.
Thank you. First, I'm just going to stay with Dr. Riggs for a minute because many questions came to you. We obviously want to support our local food businesses, and the question is about sanitizing, welcoming delivery food into the home. How does that relate to our health crisis?
Right. So primarily it's droplet based, so it's human to human or on close proximity surfaces. So this is why everyone is being masked at this particular point. The virus itself on, say, packaging, food, plastic, paper, is not particularly resilient. However, if one was going to be sort of had a procedure for this, they would have one person bring in the delivery, take all of the packages out and put them in serving dishes that were clean, have all of those containers put back in that, take that outside, to the trash, and then that person would, take their gloves off and wash their hands appropriately. So there's not a high risk of this, but the question is, how can we be sure? And the reality is, if you have some type of procedure where you don't, take the container and then just start eating, directly from that, transfer it to another vessel to begin the consumption, and do that in a systematic way, I think that should be safe. And by the way, we do want to support our local restaurants, as well as the fact that it, delivery actually saves the circulation in grocery stores and other markets where people may need to go and be in relatively close proximity.
Great, thank you. Rabbi Brous, outside of Modeh Ani, what are other Jewish prayers or blessings for gratitude can we practice daily in this time?
I love that question. Thank you. I'll tell you what I've been thinking of every day. There's an incredible moment in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, in which when the gates of the concentration camp are opened after the liberation, he describes walking across the field and just looking up at the expanse of the field before him and the sky above him. And he says he collapses to the ground and he says, Min ha-metzar karatiya anani b'merchavya, from out of the narrowest place, I cried out to you and you answered me with great expansiveness. And we say these words in Hallel, it comes from the book of Psalms, but I think especially as we go into Passover, Mitzrayim, the narrow place, like really understanding and reliving in some ways this journey has become for me really grounding every morning. The more constricted and constrained our lives are, the more I think we need to stretch open the boundaries of what's possible and think about what real expansive possibility might look like right now.
Thank you. Jay, what's the best deal with how can we best deal with this crisis as a community when we are separated?
Well, I was going to say, in terms of some of the lightness that I already see coming out of the crowds, Rabbi Brous, as an example, she preaches to her community, and she does a lot of things in the media and a lot of things around the country. But today, we can see Rabbi Brous every day. Doesn't matter where we live. Doesn't matter what denomination we're in. We can experience some of the great teachers and the great rabbis of our community in our homes. Today, we have a deeper appreciation for our doctors and our nurses and our hospitals. There's something going on in our community that if we embrace it, we are richer for it, right? We can learn more and we can appreciate more because we are seeing things that we wouldn't see before. And so I think when it comes to the community, this is a moment where we all have to come together, even though we can't come together, right? We have to find ways to touch each other, even though we can't physically touch each other, and find ways to build community when we can't be in the same room. It's like working different muscles. And so as a federation, we have to look at that and find ways to connect to the disconnected. And it's easier to do this now because everybody is disconnected, and find ways to show appreciation to those who are central to our lives, but we never think about it because we go about our lives moment by moment. And now we can take a deep breath and say, the doctor that helped me, the nurse that helped me, the rabbi that counseled me, I feel closer to them and I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. And when it comes to building community, the Federation does it a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, this is a human, person-to-person way of connecting.
I guess I have a question for the three of you, which is, all three of you are in unique positions where new partnerships would arise because of this. And I wonder if you could each speak to a new partnership that might have come out of this so far. Rabbi Brous, would you like to go first?
I mean, it's interesting. We are seeing in the rabbinic community, there's a great coming together that's happening right now, mostly because we're all trying to figure out how best to hold our community members in this very strange time. And there's a kind of sharing of resources and generosity of spirit that I think our community desperately needs. And so I feel very lifted up by that. I really want to agree with what Jay just are exposed to or able to encounter truths that we could not see in other times. In the first couple of weeks of this pandemic, we began to have in earnest a national conversation about paid sick leave, which is something that for many, many decades, this country has resisted having a conversation about. And then all of a sudden we realized that if anyone is unwell and feels compelled to go to work, it makes all of us unwell. And so there's a kind of opening of the conversation there that's happening. I think that this question about essential workers outside of medical care workers, who gets to be called essential workers and what that means about the work that they're actually doing, especially people who otherwise might be seen as even invisible in our society, is an absolutely critical conversation for us to be having. And so I do hope that aside from the partnerships that we're building, that the new greater awareness that we have of these kinds of conversations will transform the way we think about what we're going to be doing in the rebuilding days that come afterwards.
The thing about new partnerships is if you're in a partnership model and all you're doing is thinking about partnerships, even before the crises, they're not new partnerships. They're partnerships that need different things, right? We're all spending time with our families in a way we never did before. My guess is most families are seeing things with their children, their parents, and everyone else that they might not have seen before. So it's not like about new partnerships. It's about enriching existing partnerships and seeing the other differently than you saw them before. Lori, I'd like to ask Dr. Riggs a question because I find myself, and I know a lot of people probably feel this way, on the verge of either being overly paranoid or underprepared, right? So I really want to understand, Dr. Riggs, as we live our lives, as we go to the supermarket, as we get food delivered. I went to the supermarket and I heard that I should wear a mask, so I wore a mask. Half the people in the supermarket didn't have masks. I stayed 6 feet away. People kept coming next to me. I felt uncomfortable moving away from them. And then I got home and I washed every package I had. Can you tell us, because I think we're all thinking this, what is being conscious and responsible and what's being a little too on the other side of that?
Well, yeah, I will answer that. I do want to answer the partnership question because I agree with you about strengthening partnerships. And certainly the healthcare community across Los Angeles has come together in a way that's been very valuable for us to understand the resources, to plan resources, and to prepare for, God forbid, conversations that we may have to have as we move down that path. But the local, we're lucky enough to live in a very, highly concentrated healthcare arena. And so from that standpoint, we have more resources than others, given the folks around us and the other academic institutions. So that's a partnership that we've developed and has been very, very valuable. With regard to the paranoia, I think that from the standpoint of what is currently recommended is to decrease the spread of the virus. And so that means that you're really, when you have a mask on, you're protecting others from your secretions primarily. So that's the goal of that. With regard to the proximity in stores and people not wearing masks, I think that we're going to see that those coverings, now that CDC has recommended that folks that they do wear a mask outside or cover their mouth, and knows, I think that we're going to see that as being the standard in Los Angeles. It feels to me like everyone is, complying as best as they possibly can with regard to most of these recommendations. But I've also found in my looking around that some stores are much better prepared and much more organized. And so those are the ones that I have been frequenting. With regard to the packages themselves, as I had stated before, if they're food products, again, washing your hands after you're preparing any of the food or opening any of the food or any of those type of things should be enough to have any type of, residue, potential residue of that. Many people are starting to bag their own groceries and those type of things. And I think we can't know because we're not looking at the virus itself and the live version, meaning that there could be remnants of a dead virus on a surface or a package, but we haven't, we're not in the place to look at testing, wood versus plastic versus paper versus metal to understand exactly what the persistence is. So what I would say is that you have to feel safe, and this is oftentimes the precautions that people take make them feel more in control. And we also have to understand that right now we don't have enough scientific evidence to guide, with 100% accuracy, sort of your prescription around what exactly should be done. So I'd like for people to stay in that middle paranoid area because I think it ultimately is going to help us keep everybody aware of how actually we can keep each other safe.
So just following up on that, if we have been sheltered for 14 days, is there an opportunity to go see some family that has also been sheltered for 14 days?
So, well, that's a great question. As you probably have heard, 25% of folks that get this virus don't show any symptoms. So let's say there's 3 people in the household you're going to go visit. You've been sheltered for 14 days by yourself. There's 3 people. So 14 times plus 14 plus 14 is 52, right? 42. So it's 42. So that's how many days that it would actually be, because they could have passed it between each other. So although they may be, they may be fine with all being together for those 14 days and may not have reacted, one of them could still be, potentially infectious after the end of the 14 days. So the math doesn't quite work out, the way we would think it would with being sheltered. And by the way, there's lots of creative ways to see your loved ones and be with your loved ones. And that's one of the creative spirits I think that has come out of this, is the ability for us to connect and learn how to connect even when we can't physically connect.
So we also got a question, Dr. Riggs, how is Cedars-Sinai dealing with COVID?
How are we dealing with COVID? Well, there's this gray hair right here. So we've been in incident command for over a month, meaning that we've been setting up systems. We've been setting up systems here to respond to the potential surge that's coming in multiple different areas. We have about 24 working groups that have developed different resources. For instance, working from home needs a new suite of tools. Visiting the patient remotely from health clinics or offices needs a new set of tools. Understanding the personal protective equipment that we have. We stood up our own testing here at Cedars-Sinai for the PCR, and we'll be getting in the rapid test this week. So, we have multiple lanes of work. So that's what we've chosen to do, is to connect with both our colleagues in New York and Seattle and Washington that have had some of the first experiences with this, understand what that looks like, stick to the facts, stick to the science, and stick together. That's kind of what we're doing. And there's multiple different paths that we've had to work on in parallel, including really difficult, decisions early on to cancel all of our meetings here on campus. our support meetings for AA and different types of Alzheimer's meetings and stroke meetings. So these support groups, finding alternate ways for people to connect and get the needs met has been challenging. But those difficult decisions, I think, were the right ones as we move through this.
And also, just in that, what about pregnancy in the house? There's people who are about to deliver or are pregnant right now. They'll at some point will be delivering. How are we to encourage them to feel safe and calm?
Well, what I can say is be safe and calm. We don't know of any effects of this particular virus on any of the folks who may have it and may deliver. So we know that pregnant women have different abilities because of the hormonal changes in their body and additional stress of pregnancy. However, if you think about the virus being, sort of coming out of China in the December-January timeframe, we don't even have 9 months for a full cycle to actually understand and have any type of understanding of what it might do in the different stages. Now we know that people have delivered and that being COVID positive, and there have been no difficulties around that. And again, as you probably know, the literature is emerging that women generally do better with this disease than men do overall. So I think that I think they should take this in stride. There's not any particular specific guidance around pregnancy at this particular point.
Rabbi Brous, what are some of the spiritual lessons to learn during this time for us to take in?
One of the things I've been thinking the most about over the last couple of weeks is, and this is of course because of the timing, just as the isolation descended upon us and the virus just before Passover, about what it means to orient ourselves spiritually on a trajectory of hope. So the story that we tell of Passover is a story me'afela le'ora, from darkness to light, me'yagon le'simcha, it says in the Mishnah, from anguish to joy, from degradation to dignity. That journey I was talking about earlier, from narrowness to expansiveness, is the trajectory that's built into our liturgy, built into our core narratives, and built into so much of our Jewish ritual and practice. And so I think that's a really critical message for us, that we have a muscle memory for survival in dark times. I was speaking recently to a reporter who was asking me about what the message of Passover is in light of COVID-19, and I shared with her that message, and she said, "But don't you think it's ironic that the Jews are going to come out of Passover right at the moment that this virus is expected to peak in Los Angeles? And so if this is really going to train the heart and mind to move through difficulty and toward a kind of redemptive future, won't reality belie your sacred story?" And I said to her, it's not magic. This is not a promise that there will be immediacy to this redemption, but rather the idea that built deep into the Jewish DNA is a sense of hope and possibility, that this is not where this story ends. There will be terrible loss. There's already been terrible loss here. I'm sure that you read some of the stories this morning from New York City, where there now is no room left in the morgues, and they're contemplating actually doing temporary interments in the public parks in New York City, which is just beyond devastating for all of us. It's bad, and it seems like it's going to get worse before it gets better. And retelling these stories of liberation doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay in a week, but it means that we're casting our gaze toward the future, where there will be a path from darkness to light. And we remember that ours is a very, very long journey, and there have been dark chapters before. There have been Passovers that have been celebrated in dark times before, and there will be again. And the story doesn't end here. And for me, that's a very hopeful message. This spiritual message is it's the closest thing to the genetic transmission of hope that we're actually telling and retelling and then allowing to enter our body through matzah and through the foods that we eat on Passover, the sense that there is going to be a way through this and a way out of that. And I think that's absolutely essential as we go through this very difficult time.
Thank you, Rabbi Brous. Dr. Riggs, another question for you. If you've had the virus, are you in a safe, do you recover? When you recover, are you immune? Are you in a better position to be out in the public?
So, right, currently we're working on testing to understand the folks that have antibodies to the particular virus and may have already been exposed. Again, we don't know how long that particular immunity would last because we haven't been through a whole cycle yet, but one theoretically would be immune for this particular virus. The problem is we don't have that widespread testing available, at this time. And so that's may be available here shortly. And so at that particular time, we may be able to understand what that looks like, but we still won't know the course of this for another period of time until we have 6 or 9 months more under our belt to understand how the virus behaves, as well as the immunity that's restored from that. I do have one question that I see in the questions that I'd like to answer. There's a request in here about someone told us that Cedars is placing a DNR on anyone admitted regardless of age. Is this true? Apparently New York did this for age 65 and over. This is not true. We are not in that place in our organization. We are, as always, advocating folks have those discussions in advance of any serious illness. And so we always do that for our end of life and dignity for folks at the end of life, but we don't have any policy related to placing folks on DNR regardless of their age.
Laura, you're on mute.
Sorry. Many of us want to donate blood. We got a question about that. What about the safety protocols? Can we feel that that's something that we can do?
So, right, so the couple of things, if one is tested positive for COVID-19, then we are currently collecting plasma to understand what that looks like to see if that may be of help. So if one is tested positive, yes. The screening pieces around COVID in this particular time frame, it's difficult to know exactly how to recommend that, especially if people have been recently sick. So I think that the blood bank will do the specific screening on the specific risk factors, as well as the blood donation history in the past too, which is also oftentimes very helpful.
Dr. Riggs, I think most people don't understand what the whole concept of peaking means. I'm wondering, I mean, when this peaks, then, how does that play out in terms of the coming weeks and months? And, I'm not going to ask you when you think we're going to be able to go back to work and I'm going to be able to hug somebody, but I am curious about the whole concept of peaking and what that really means.
Right. So the concept of peaking is that by this physical distancing that we're doing now, we're allowing for folks to get infected at a slower rate over time, right? So there will be some continued infections with the virus circulating in the community, but if one looks at the models of that, it's much, much slower. So that means that if 20% require hospitalization, 20% of people, which is what we know, and 5% of those require ICU, if you source all of that into 4 weeks where everybody's sick, so 100,000 people, you get sick and you got 20,000 people are hospitalized and you need 5,000 ICU beds, and that's over the course of 4 weeks. That peak was what's happened in places like Wuhan and Italy and Spain, right? It's very short, intense, lots of people getting sick and lots of people needing care. By flattening the curve over time, we extend that ability to care and get people care over a longer period of time. So if this lasts for 4 or 6 months and the virus continues to have at a low level of activity, we can care for all those people. We can't do that over 4 or 6 weeks. We can do it over 4 or 6 months. So that's why we're physical distancing now. That's why we're flattening the curve. That's why we're also, the longer period of time we have, the more opportunity we have to better understand how to treat the disease. There's some immune modulating pieces and cytokine storm that we don't really understand all that well now. And obviously we have a lot of clinical trials that are going on here at Cedars to understand if we can find a way in that's better for everybody. So the time that it buys us is amazingly helpful on a lot of different levels. And you can see that New York, as the rabbi spoke about, has been overwhelmed. Their peak has been very, very sharp, very, very steep. And, you know, that's what we're trying to avoid here in Los Angeles and California.
And Deloria, I'm going to jump on you, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Bross another question, which is, we're all many different people. And I communicated with you how much I loved the video of you making challah with your family. We're also parents, and I'm wondering what you say to your children, because they're going through something that is hard to really understand for adults.
Great question. First, let me just say I'm absolutely astonished and deeply grateful for the way that our schools have pivoted so quickly. That our kids had 2 days off from school in the beginning of March when the teachers essentially learned an entirely new way of teaching. They learned the new technology, new pedagogy, and they just, you know, starting the next Monday, were able to totally transform their approach. And so with everybody learning from home, I mean, they're very, very aware of what a different time this is for them. And as much as I'm worried about them losing their innocence as this continues to unfold, and really seeing what I fear could be some of the worst of humanity coming out, they're also seeing the very best of humanity. And they're learning a lot about community and shared responsibility. Just the very message about wearing a face covering every time you leave the house, and knowing that that's not to protect us, but that's to protect other people from us, even though we think that we're healthy right now. That's a really important message for our children, and I think that they're understanding that and really learning that. They're also seeing doctors and medical technicians and nurses and the security at the hospitals, frankly, and you know the maintenance to the hospitals and the people who pick up the trash outside of our home every week, and the people who are stocking the groceries as really critical people in our society. And that I'm so grateful and glad that they're developing that deeper understanding of the very profound connectedness between all of the many parts of our society and all the ways that each individual person is contributing. So it's hard for kids, especially teenagers. And you know, I got a little guy here who likes to be outside playing basketball all the time, and instead he's doing a lot of 1,000-piece puzzles. But it's really the lessons that they're learning, I know, will help build them into the human beings that they will be in the world.
So we're coming around to the end, and I wanted to give everybody a chance to say some final thoughts. One of the questions on some of the final thoughts were, what are some of the things you think we're doing right? So Sharon Brous, then Dr. Riggs, and then Jay.
Well, look, I started by talking about the devastating effects of the isolation on each of us as individuals, and it's absolutely true. And also, as Dr. Riggs indicated, this isolation could be saving our lives and saving other people's lives. And I just want to recognize it's taking a lot for people to be apart. And I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that people are doing it, that we're following the rules, that they're staying home, that we're making these sacrifices. This is going to be a Passover like none that we've ever experienced. We are not going to be seated at the table with our loved ones. And I think that that's a huge sacrifice, and it's an incredibly meaningful sacrifice. So I think that's something that we're really getting right. And we have to just we have to, in some ways, overcompensate for the physical distance by being even more spiritually present and finding ways to be in proximity with one another. But I do recognize and acknowledge how extremely difficult it is for people, and how deeply appreciative and I know we all are, for the fact that people are doing the right thing right now and should continue to.
I want to reiterate something that Rabbi Brau said about the conversations that we're having in our country about our safety net, our health coverage, our ability to pull together for communities when people are in need, and looking at understanding, as was pointed out, our invisible, the folks that are oftentimes invisible in our society, and holding them up and understanding that everybody does have their own particular path to walk and their own contribution to make. The outpouring of gratitude from the patients and family members, all the folks that are here, as well as the esprit de corps of the staff, has been absolutely just reinvigorating. When I round upstairs on some of the units that are full of COVID confirmed patients, the sort of energy, the dedication, the call, it instills in the healthcare world why we went into this in the first place, and our desire to get it right and do the best for our community. So I think that's some of what we're getting right, and that's a community getting it right, not just one person.
Look, I think first of all, we're seeing people in a whole new light. There's whole groups of people doing jobs that we took for granted, like delivering food and delivering other kinds of things. We see people who are taking great risks with great courage to not just do their job, but to serve their communities. If you take a walk out in the neighborhood and you're 6 feet away, but you take a walk out in the neighborhood, more people are saying hello to me now than they've ever said hello to me. I think we're seeing the best of people in great ways. One of the things that is inspiring to me is that I have for a long time felt like we really need to reimagine Jewish life. And I don't want to do it out of a sense of darkness. I want to do it out of a sense of lightness. And what I have seen from our spiritual leaders, our rabbis, is a way of reimagining how they're delivering their message, how they're teaching Torah, how we're going into their homes. There's a personalization in a very impersonal way, right? Like we are stuck looking at this screen. I make jokes of my dreams are with 9 boxes, like the Brady Bunch. But the truth is, our spiritual leaders and our teachers are embracing this, reaching more people, and we are creating community in a way we never did before. If we're able to take that and build on the existing institutions and not forget that this had value, we could have the richest Jewish community of all time. That shut-in that lives in an area and can't afford to go to synagogue and now believes that learning Torah is important, we have to build upon that, right? So I think that we are seeing our doctors, and we deeply appreciate Cedars-Sinai. The partnership with the Federation has been unbelievable, and Dr. Riggs and everybody at Cedars. We are blessed to have great doctors and nurses and first-line responders and people working at all elements in the medical field. We're blessed to have them. We're blessed to have firemen and police officers and people doing their job when it's dangerous to do their job. Average people now are taking risks to do their job. And I think we have to really recognize the courage and the beauty of all of this, and then take what we've learned in terms of outreach and build upon it when this is all done. And it's inspiring, and it's inspiring to me. And I need to be inspired because my job is so hard, and the decisions we're going to have to make going forward will be difficult ones. But to see how people are stepping up, it's extraordinary.
Thank you all so much. It was a wonderful afternoon. Rabbi Sharon Brous, Dr. Richard Riggs, Jay Sanderson, thank you all so much.
So I want to just say a couple of things because we're just entering into Passover. I wish everybody a meaningful Passover. Take advantage of what you have. Don't think about what you don't have when you are going through the Haggadah. I want to reference people to the website, www.jewishla.org. If you know someone in trouble, write this number down, 323-761-8305. We are here for you. We want to make sure that the most vulnerable are taken care of. We want to make sure that people who are disconnected feel connected. So please go to the website. Please make a call, give the phone number, and whatever you can do. We appreciate this community, and we want to build the Jewish community for all of us in the future, stronger and more resilient.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.